All right, well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our guest speaker is professional landscape architect Vallari Talapatra, and she is the president and founder of EcoScapes, a landscaping company which focuses on native plantings that provide low maintenance and four-season impact, making sure that your garden is beautiful all year round. They specialize in natural area restoration, conservation, and sustainable solutions in the environment. Vallari teaches landscape design at the College of DuPage and the Arboretum. Tonight, she will provide information about how to create a garden space that offers rest and renewal. Vallari will explain how to incorporate the elements that create meditative places in order to invite lingering, relaxation, and contemplation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Vallari. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Barry, for that introduction. And I actually have about 77 slides to go. So I'm going to go through some of those slides rapidly to make room for questions at the end. I'm hoping to be able to get through to everyone's questions, of course. So Barry has said that if need be, we might actually do that even beyond the 8 o'clock hour. So without my screenshot and instead just go to the next screen, which I just wanted to let you know that I have actually conducted the Meditative Garden Seminar about 3 times now. I first started doing it in 2009 and the last one I did was in 2015. And they usually range over 2 weekends within this hour. And in my, 2 decades of doing this, there have been reasons that I've found that folks like to use a garden as their area to meditate or to contemplate with you, Chair. And something that actually allows us to connect to the larger whole. And last but not the least is that a garden awakens all of us, and thereby it actually lets us connect to our souls. And I have all through the different literature that's out that talks about meditative gardens and the various ways to actually create a meditative spot for yourself in the garden. And I've included some of these articles, the ones that are most current, in a supplement that Barry is going to actually forward to everybody, so you have that. And within that is also a few articles that I have them as a bibliography of the collection of books that I think you guys would really enjoy, which talks about meditative gardens. Now, having parsed through all of the literature, these are 6 of the pointers that I feel are really important to create a meditative garden. And some are more intuitive than others, some are more tangible than others, but here they are. So number 1 is water. Number 2 is balance. Number 3 is sanctuary. Number 4 is destination/journey. I feel like both of those are kind of interlinked. So I've chosen to both together. Number 4 is nature. Number 5 is symbolism. I'm sorry, number 6 is symbolism. So I think basically, you have a whole gamut of things to pick from, and what I'm going to try making you aware of how to combine all these elements within your own site. So the first element, as I said, water, which is sort of, I find the most intuitive for people to understand why water has a meditative quality. There's a cleansing aspect that's associated with water, and it's been most of our gardens starting in the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, and even now. And in most houses of worships, etc., you can see the use of water because of its healing properties. And as you also know, the body of water is considered to, it forms its own ecology, and so on and so forth. So it has a very vital importance in actually incorporating this element of contemplation in your meditative garden. The shape of water is really pliable. In other words, takes on the shape of anything that you put it in, and it metaphorically really an amazing. Also, the other thing that when you actually hear it flow, it has a very soothing sound, and that is something that actually can make us aware, make our senses more aware. And the reflective nature of water is something that is also equally cherished in our meditative gardens. So the stillness and the reflective nature actually mirrors the natural contemplative quality of our souls.
Valerie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your sound is cutting out just a little bit. I wonder if, just for bandwidth, if you want to go ahead and turn off your video, that might give you a little bit more bandwidth, because primarily we want to just see your, the beautiful pictures in your slides. So that
right.
That might be helpful.
As I was saying, that the reason why I kind of juxtaposed the two different shots of the still water is to kind of make you aware that you could get the same quality of that reflective water in just an urn. It doesn't have to be a big space. The next element that I want to talk about is balance. And as you can see, I've actually included the slide of a front yard instead of a meditative zone. And there's a reason for that, because a sense of balance basically is something a little bit more intangible. So I want you guys to be able to grasp what I'm talking about. So when I'm talking about balance in a landscape, what I'm saying is that the landscape or your garden or your meditative spot needs to have unity. It needs to have a rhythm, needs to have order. And so the sense of balance can come from layering in the right way and creating a sense of order with a very strong geometry, and then having a sense of scale to things and connecting to the larger whole. So if you have these elements, your garden is going to have a sense of balance. And if you have that sense of balance in the landscape, it actually automatically instills balance in the individual. So in order to create that harmony, I talked about using geometry. You can see how in this particular instance, the designer has used circles and spheres to kind of really create that geometric order. So even though the plant elements that you see around are, chaotic, there's a sense of calm, and that calmness comes from that very strong geometric order. And simple lines can also do that. And they don't actually have to be just rectilinear. Even when you're drawing your curves or your curvilinear lines, if they're bold and strong, you will find a sense of order that comes in the garden. And with that sense of order comes that very tranquil space. So I find that to be something that's really tricky for most homeowners to get to. But if you kind of actually parse through this, I think you will be able to do that as well. And as we go through these different elements, as I said, as we conclude that and we launch on to the next step of how to bring that into your yard, I can show you some ways to do that. Also harnessing the balance in nature, by which I mean the order in nature. So one of the things that you have to do also is observe what nature does. See how layered the natural landscape is. Like when you're in a park or in a setting where you can actually see nature, I would like you to start observing more. And when you observe that, you'll see how layered and textured nature is. And so what I'm asking you to do is harness that quality of nature and bring it into your backyard. And that, again, right off the bat, is going to give you a sense of balance. This again is a front yard, and you can see that the lower right picture is the spring, then the top is the fall, and then this is a vignette of the sort of spring picture, just a close-up view. And this, even though it's just a front entryway planting, it has a sense of balance, and that's sort of what we are talking about. So when you talk about the feeling of ease that you get in a meditative garden, that a lot of times without you recognizing it is actually coming from the well-layered, well-controlled, textured landscape that you're surrounded. When you're talking about actually mimicking the natural order and bringing it to your backyards, you need to remember to do them in larger drifts. So to kind of step away from, using just, one or two plants, but, kind of engaging in drifts of 7 or 8. And you can see here, like, this setting looks like it's always been there, but it's that we designed with the full intentions of it, looking that way. So, which brings me to my next element, the element of sanctuary, which is to me a little bit more tangible and probably easy for folks to understand. Threw up the dictionary definition of sanctuary, which is, there are 3 ways to describe it in the dictionary: a place of refuge, a nature preserve, and a holy place. And the key words to actually describe sanctuary in the dictionary is refuge, haven, harbor, oasis, park, altar, reserve, shrine, sanctum. Of course, the word sanctuary comes from the word sanctum. And I'm proposing that sanctuary is actually, it's more than a place, it is a state of mind. And this is a sanctuary that is being created right in front of a Japanese tea room in a way that signifies obviously an enclosure that's giving it some privacy and sort of a zone of calm, and where you can actually go inward into yourself. And that's what a sanctuary essentially does, is to make you feel comfortable, at ease, and close to yourself. So when you're planning for privacy, sometimes it doesn't have to be the ultimate privacy like this. It can be something in between. So on the right is a picture of a courtyard where you could step through and enter into this pergola structure that makes you feel like it's a different home. And so you're enclosed kind of partially within this pergola. On the left is actually a front yard with sort of a harbor-like seating wall even. And even that little thing actually can give you the feeling of enclosure. So I want to kind of, every time I show you an element, I want to show you the different varieties of those same elements. So the element of sanctuary takes me to this next thing that I want to discuss briefly, which is the sense of scale. And now if you look at I hope you can see my cursor, but if you can see this is about a 40 feet high wall, and then this pad, and then the 2 chairs with these tall bamboos going, right? And here you see the arborvitaes and the bench. And here I propose that if you had some sort of plantings, may they be arborvitaes or may they be something else, linear that would be about 10 feet tall, that would actually bring this whole sitting area to scale. So the sense of scale is kind of important for you to feel that this is a safe space. The reason to create a sanctuary-like effect is to give you that safe space feel. And another way to actually create a sanctuary is to carve out a space or carve out a subspace from a larger whole. So like even if you had like a larger backyard, to just carve out a little niche for yourself is how you would start to create a sanctuary. So the next element I'm going to discuss is destination/journey. And that's basically something that, again, is intuitive, but I want to kind of connect them together and talk about them together. So one of the things, having a meditative garden is to feel that you're actually kind of discarding the normalcy of life and going into something that's going to make you look inward or make you more aware and thereby make you more inspired to actually connect with yourself even. So when you create a special entrance to your sanctuary, automatically you're doing that. You're almost honoring that space, and honoring the meditative space is important. And so this whole concept of escaping into nature, so you're escaping actually from the mundane and the normal into this transcendental or into nature. And one of the ways of doing that is to create a threshold, to create this sense that you're actually embarking on this new journey that's going to lead you into this space that feels safe, that is at ease, that is well balanced. And one of the other ways of doing something like that, where you're actually being able to create that sense of going into this other world, which I call otherworldliness type of a situation, is to level up, which means that you're actually climbing a couple steps in some instances, or maybe multiple steps in other instances, to go into this realm that I like to call the sacred mound effect. So, there used to be, in the 15th, 16th century, particularly in Celtic gardens, where they had the concept of the sacred mound. And it basically just means that you have a sort of an archetype where you like to be on top of a mountain to reach the sky, right? And so this kind of a garden where you're stepping up to reach the sky gives you that feeling of connectedness. And again, I have juxtaposed two slides to kind of show you that you can do that in an extremely sort of modern way, which is on the left, or you could do it in an extremely sort of traditional way, which is to the right. So it doesn't matter what taste you have and what your sort of is, you can achieve the same kind of thinking or the same type of meditative space, and I'm just gonna slow down here for a quick minute to plug in a book that I think has really changed my thinking about meditation. And that is a book called The Inward Garden by Julie Moyer Meservey. I have that in the bibliography, so can maybe even check it out from the Wheaton Public Library or elsewhere. But Julie actually talks about the different archetypes within human beings. So not all of us are obviously equal. So some of us connect more with the feeling, which means to have something behind us to make us feel protected. Others like to be on a mound. There are some others that like to be surrounded in a sea-like situation. So you have to discover, go into a journey where of sort of self-discovery, where you are trying to find out what actually rocks your boat. What's the type of garden that really speaks to you? And that is something that is going to be different for everyone. So now I'm connecting the destination together, and you see pretty quickly why they are that connected. One of the main reasons why you will always find some sort of a pathway to a meditative garden is to have that journey aspect. And the reason why we, as garden designers, landscape architects, we like to create these walkways is to make you actually slow down, you know. And the walkways can be narrow in a side yard or wide. It doesn't really matter. The whole purpose of creating these walkways and taking you to your destination is so that you can admire the really interesting, you know, little plants, or maybe admire the spilling bark, or maybe admire a stone, a boulder, or something that's beckoning you to keep going forward. But you sometimes might not know what is at the end, and sometimes you might. So nevertheless, you kind of go through it, and it kind of allows you to be mindful. The whole essence of this designing the meditative garden, in my mind, actually, is to keep making you more aware and keep making you mindful. And so this mindfulness brings me to the labyrinth, which I have designed and installed about 4 labyrinths thus far, and I've seen how folks actually find use in that. And you basically the whole concept of the labyrinth comes from the concept of walking meditation. It's also called Heightened. And it's to basically, what they found is that walking meditation actually reduces emotional and physical stress. And you can actually, if you don't want to do a whole full-blown labyrinth in your backyard, you can do the same thing by just having walkways. And I hope I have the time to share one project at the end that does exactly that. And so these are 2 other walkways that I just wanted to kind of, again, show the dialectic nature of these 2, because in one, you can see the end. So you see your destination point, and it still makes you essentially really aware because of the pattern on the floor. And it's got a very sinuous serpentine kind of pattern, and it's kind of beckoning you towards going to that point. And in the other, it's a much more closed thing where you really don't know what's on the other side of the gate, and it sort of has a different technique of taking you through, and it does not matter which kind you're choosing. The point of the main focus here should be that walkways do help, because they do slow you down, they do make you experience, and as you're experiencing, as you're observing, you are awakening. That's what the goal here is. Which brings me to this element, which I think all of us can relate to, is nature, right? And within nature, we basically have earth, water, air. These are the 3 elements. So we actually kind of just discussed water as an element, so I'm not going to about that. And the air element I am going to discuss just in the next few minutes. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about earth. Within the gamut of earth, we talk about stones, and we talk about plants, and we talk about trees. So basically, when you're talking about nature, there are 2 different ways of dealing with nature in a meditative garden. One is that you're enjoying nature, That means you're basically looking at it. You're looking at the colors, the textures, you're looking at the wind blowing through it, you're looking at the, the way you're surrounded in it, you're kind of soaking within nature, if you will, and you're just really enjoying it. In the other instance, you're actually using gardening as a meditative act. So in other words, you're really getting down and dirty. You're getting into the act of gardening. And that is actually such a sort of a mindful way to kind of connect with the earth, that it actually, in many ways, therapeutic. So in nature, these are the things that actually happen, which is why nature becomes such a good way to, or rather such an important element, I should say, in our meditative garden, design. So as we know, obviously we have smell, touch, taste, look, and listen. And I'm going to kind of try to share with you how you can bring these senses into your garden. And I'm trying to kind of explain it to you through my favorite flower, which is the lavender. And the visual, the sort of awe-inspiring visuals of these rows of lavender is just amazing. You basically connect with lavender through the amazing smell, of course. I also happen to use lavender in my tea, which I love. So lavender, as you can see, I mean, it's just one small flower, but has this amazing quality of being able to connect with you through all these different senses, I mean. And so which brings me to this whole thing of, using aromatic plants and being able to sort of just pause and inhale and awaken that sense of smell in a way that really makes you feel connected. And to touch a plant like thyme, or to walk on it, or to feel it, or to walk on moss. All of these amazing experiences actually, just like I said, awaken the senses to a point where you're really aware, you're alive, you're so immersed in that act of touching, of feeling, of smelling, that you are really engaged with nature. And it doesn't quite have to end there. You can also taste nature, right? So you can actually have herb gardens and edible gardens. And as I mentioned, there are two ways to actually interact with nature. One is you're enjoying just the beauty of it, the aesthetic quality of it. And the other is to actually get down and dirty and start to garden, right? And so the gardening, the act of gardening itself, as I said, is therapeutic, but then also the fruits of that labor, the tomatoes and the basils and all of that is also a way to connect with nature. Which brings me to the most common way of obviously connecting with nature is the visuals. How do you look at nature? And these heightened colors like orange, or like in the middle picture, as you can see on the corner, there's like a mirror juxtaposed there as a vertical element in the garden. I'm talking about this particular element right here. Or this is in Chanticleer, in the teacup garden, as you can see, this focal point that's just so large in scale and just so sort of, again, it's just kind of, stops you in your tracks. And so these heightened sense of visuals sometimes, like, boom, it just kind of connects you to that space, So it's either through visuals, or through the sense of touch, or through the sense of smell, or through the sense of taste. And these are, again, some more ways to kind of visually connect with nature. The layering, the texturing, so like here, these are super simple lines. But then, the layering, you have the tree, the next layer, the shrub, and then the ground plane. So it's almost kind of this layering that happens in nature that just visually connects you with nature. And then last but not the least, obviously, the listening part of it, the listening to your to your garden, listening to the babbling brook, listening birds, listening to ornamental grasses sway in the wind. And that's where, the element of air actually comes into play again, with using grasses and wind chimes and things like that, which makes you aware of the element of air that's so important for us. So you have water, you have air, and then you have earth. And that's what, constitutes the realm of nature. And that's why nature becomes sort of such a key element. It's almost the most critical element actually within your meditative garden landscape. So it's not just that you have to understand how to use nature, but you also have to figure out a way that you can sort of address the senses that are most important to you. Again, like I said, not everybody is the same. So I might find it more appealing to, enhance the sense of sight or vision. You might find it more appealing to enhance the sense of smell. So everybody has a different taste. And in this one, I just want to kind of go back to the very first slide in which I said that nature really is a microcosm, and it becomes kind of important to look at it also as a habitat. So it's kind of infinite in all directions is how I would like to define it. There is a remarkable book by a physicist called Freeman Dyson who talks about infinity in all directions, and by that he means that obviously we are in a universe expanding that's sort of infinite, and then within our microcosm, like within our really small cellular structure, you can divide and subdivide and go into it again infinitesimally. So it's kind of an amazing, miraculous quality that we find in nature, that we get to observe these small inflorescence of flowers having large impacts, or these small blades of grass having large impact. So this is sort of what I was talking about. And so the nature doesn't quite end with just you thinking about it in terms of awakening senses, but it also kind of starts to get into the whole realm of habitat gardens and creating different sort of ways to experience nature and live with it. So one of the things that I don't want to miss while talking about nature is also stones. That is part of earth. As I mentioned, stones are going to be discussed as part of earth. And stones signify actually permanence. And thereby they become a very, very integral part of a meditation. I have to say that there are very few meditative gardens that I have seen being super effective without using stone in any shape or form. So stones are something that you have to think about bringing into your meditative garden. And the only thing would be how would you bring that in? And we can discuss that, or I can show it to you how you could do that. Which brings me to my last element, which is symbols and meanings. And by what I mean by that is I talked about honoring the space, or honoring this meditative garden. And one of the ways to do that is to actually bring meaning to it. And I want to quickly kind of discuss the universality of patterns, by which I mean that certain patterns that you see in nature are actually universal. And the Fibonacci series is one such algorithm that you see everywhere. You see it in petals, you see it in the fronds of the fern, you see it in the seashells, you see it in sunflower seed heads. You see it in the Da Vinci human figure drawing. You see it in the pyramids of Egypt, this whole golden ratio. So it's kind of a unique thing. And this is an example from the Chelsea Garden Show, where celebrates that beauty and the underpinning of this amazing aesthetic that you can see all around us, literally all around us, in architecture, in plants, in growth, in studying life. Frank Lloyd Wright used the same golden ratio for his ever so famous the Frank Lloyd Wright windows. So this is a very sort of a universal pattern that we find ourselves being drawn to again and again. And the aesthetics is basically produced by the math that actually governs this universal pattern. And the reason why I'm saying all this is because you have to find a way to bring personal touch, personal meaning to your space. Stones actually have a huge way of doing this. It could be found objects, found stones. You could also actually create your own story and create your own little thing. Like you could create mosaics, you could create stone art by balancing rocks one on top of the other, maybe, or like a patio that you see in one of these, where you can get artistic with your space. So what that basically means is you're just bringing some value to your space. You can make it whimsical, like I said, with your own found objects, through travels, through other things, or maybe even one of my clients, for instance, used a birdhouse that her grandchildren had made and made it a centerpiece in her meditative garden. So I think it just means, it just kind of, to me, is important that you understand that you have to really be more inward focused and figure out what it is that you want out of the space. One of the things that I have to say that is important in the meditative garden is this feeling of calm and tranquility. And oftentimes this kind of tranquility comes from simplicity, it comes from rhythm, and you can see that also coming from the rhythms, by the way, can also come from patterns. So like, for instance, in this particular context, you can see how the way the squares kind of flit through the space has a very strong rhythmatic aspect to it, as did this. So rhythm in a space is kind of important, and rhythm can come from repeating elements. So like even here, you can see the repetition of the grasses. This is a serpentine walkway that I designed, and you can see it actually kind of going through, but then having this kind of a zone where you can actually pause, where my client decided to put the sculpture of the praying hands, and that is meaningful to her. So it depends on what's meaningful to you and what you would want to bring to your own garden. I want to discuss actually two gardens to me that have a lot of spirit elements and symbolism to them. One is the Zen garden, and the other is the Celtic garden. So in the Zen garden, I mean, it's going to take me a whole another hour to discuss the lengths and breadths of it, but I'll keep it really, really short. I just want to say that in the Zen garden, really, like the gravel, washed gravel on the left that you see is signifying our metaphoric river, and then you have stepping stones crossing through it. towards the gate that opens it to the next, the other world per se. So you're kind of almost treading through these to get to that zone of calm. And then the other one, which probably you all are familiar with, when you see the raked sand, which signifies sea, and the outcroppings that are vertical like that, signifying mountains. And in this case, the flagstone walkway is kind of like the passage through it. So as you're walking through it, you're metaphorically going through that space. And in the Celtic gardens, you see the use of these dry stacked stones. So in the Celtic gardens, the importance of stones and sticks is just huge. So, and the sense of shelter, the sense of threshold is really kind of comes into sharp focus. And I wanted to kind of mention those because all of those have, again, metaphorical meanings that I just described to you before, the harbor effect, right? And the whole concept of the threshold. So, which brings me to one of our most sort of coveted symbols that we are all sort of familiar with, the tree of life, and the power of trees themselves, right? Like the trees are the best sanctuary. Like they are sanctuaries upon themselves. And forest bathing, the Shinrin Yoku, which basically means that you're just letting yourself get soaked or bathed in the essence of the forest. And here you can see again, here I'm kind of trying to find that mound, and like I talked about the sacred mound and having the steps to climb up to that retreat. So this whole concept of the retreat in the woods kind of thing. And that it doesn't have to be very elaborate. I'm trying to kind of show you how, just in a shade of a small tree, or you can carve out a really private sort of retreat space or a subspace and create your own little sanctuary. Sometimes, you can even do it like in your front yard with almost next to nothing really. So I'm just trying to kind of pose some of these simpler things to you. So you don't have a forest in your backyard, but you can grow a tree, and under that tree you can create this drama. You can create that little space for yourself. And then this one is just so dear to my heart because it's a tiny front yard, and my client's son, who has severe autism, walks this front yard on this pathway. I created like this tiny little Japanese garden for them, and they get so much use from that. And it's just kind of remarkable that you can use a small space to do a lot. And when I talk about, finding a little bit of yourself, these are some of the things I'd like you to think about. Where would you like to sit? This is what's going to trigger you to understanding whether do you seek the harbor more, or are you more of a sea kind of a person, or are you more like an island? So like I said, if you look at Julie Moyer Meserve's Inward Garden, that kind of takes you through the different metaphors, and you can kind of figure out what it is that you are more inclined to do in your meditative space. Similarly, what would you choose for your journey? Like, what materials do you like more? Do you like stones, or do you like gravel, or do you like some other element? And you can kind of start to create a mood board for yourself. This is a great launching pad for you to start your design. And like I talked about before, you need to kind of think about when you're doing an introspection, think about, how you imagine your perfect meditative garden to be, when you don't have to think about money. Think about memory, like what are some of the spaces that, haunt you, or some spaces that you really, really liked. And those are the type of things you kind of want to start thinking about. And to create your sanctuary, obviously it becomes super, simple to just go online and find one of these create your sanctuary things. This is what you would find online. You click on it and this is what you would find. Yes, you can take that and you can probably make something like this, but I'm not sure if it would be truly your own. So when you're designing your own perfect sanctuary or your own perfect meditative garden, think about just even sometimes just putting just this one perfect tree for yourself. So you have the tree, and then you have the shrub for the harbor-like feel, and then you have this a bench, and then you have the spectacular something, just a visual delight, like you're awakening your senses with a gorgeous tree, and you have pretty much all of everything that you might need. So you have the wall, you have the ceiling, and you have the floor, and there's your room. For an outdoor room, you need a wall, you need the floor, and you need the ceiling. And or something simple like this, where you have the ceiling from the being under the tree, the floor, and then you have the wall, which is your vertical elements kind of surrounding. Or you can do something right in your corner without a tree, where, you know, so you have something, a visual awakening from this delightful sculpture that you've created perhaps. And then just a little trough with water, the water element. So you can take like one small corner and turn it into something. You can, now in this particular context, again, you can see you can create an elaborate sanctuary-like effect and all of this stuff. But the key thing here that I feel that has not happened is you need to integrate it with the rest of the yard. It's so important for you to look at it in a holistic fashion. You need to examine the site, you need to figure out the soil, you need to figure out what are my existing trees and the larger context. And sometimes you might actually want to borrow the landscape, which means you're borrowing from your neighbor. So like in this instance, this garage belonged to this neighbor, and look at this little nook that's formed for these guys. These guys live here, and this garage belongs to the neighbor on the other side, and they don't use this space, but these guys do. But 20 years later, this garage is gone. It was torn down, and this client of mine has put in arborvitaes, and then this little area is still functioning as a little. So that's what I mean by borrowing from others. Like, so this oak tree is in between these two houses, and we started with this kind of grouping the neighbors' trees and forming a little shade garden. 20 years later, you see that it's still working, and the two, you know, between the two neighbors, it's out. It's still becoming one ecology. So you can do these things in smaller spaces. The one thing you have to understand and remember with the meditative garden particularly is to basically uncomplicate the issue. So you want to kind of have the simpler the registration, the better off you are. I know we have about 8 minutes left, and I'm going to basically try to just go through this one garden for you to make you understand how you can do this in your own space. So this is like what I was talking about, is this mindful walking through this area and connecting it to the larger whole. This is sort of the before picture. This is a rough sketch of the idea that we were after. So like basically the idea was for my client to be able to walk through her entire yard, okay, and kind of she wanted to do this literally as a meditative function. So she would want to walk through this whole thing, and that became kind of ritualistic for her. So this is the start of that installation, which is making you walk through this spiral coming out this way. And this is what it looks like after, you know, the second year, or I know it was with the third year. And so this is the same space as that, you know, so you can't see that labyrinth that's behind this, but you can see that whole yard, the sense of integration. So the whole thing kind of speaks as one unit, but when you actually look at the little niches and the things, so this, you can't even see the walkway, but this goes into this walkway. This is that walkway. So that's going through that, and this element of water, this metaphoric thing of having a river. And so, which brings me back again to the ingredients list that we started with, which were these 6 elements that we talked about: water, balance, destination/journey, nature, sanctuary, and symbol. So those, I think, are the key things here that I wanted to kind of share with you. And I wanted to end with the eightfold path to successful design. And this is true not just for meditative garden, but for anything, is observe. So you want to kind of make sure you're observing, you're analyzing, you're creating, synthesizing, enhancing. And since design is an iterative process, you want to have the room to revise it. Then you want to execute your design. And once you've executed it, you want to still kind of have the ways and means to evaluate it so that you can keep working at it. So with that, I'm ready for questions if you want. And I can see if I can start the video.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Valerie. While people are thinking about their questions, let me just, what a wealth of information. Thank you so much for that. You very generously gave your time and effort to really cull this presentation for us tonight at no cost to the library. And especially, this is an extremely busy season for you, I know. So we want to thank you for that. More information is available about your company on the company's website and on house.com as well. As you mentioned during your presentation, you have sent me, and I will be forwarding a number of links to a lot of just a wealth of materials, some wonderful resources that our participants will want to take a look at in depth. So thank you for those. And again, I have all of the emails addresses, so I will be able to send those out, all that information out to you over the next day or so. I think people have their Q&A open, and so I'll be looking at those in just a minute. We want to give people just another minute, but I want to make sure that we took care of everything. Someone asked, do you have any tips for finding stones or found materials that you'd recommend, especially if someone is working on a tight budget?
So I think the finding stones part of it is something that is tricky, because sometimes if you find things that are like of meaning, they might be from like your grandmother's garden or something else. So that's always kind of interesting. But if you're just looking for stones in general, which I do think is important in a meditative garden, you could go to a lot of the garden centers, like have those stones and stuff. But there are also like Fox River Stone is a place in Elgin that has like really nice stone, and their pricing is actually not too bad. So you might want to look there.
Okay, great idea. Thank you. And another question we have is, do you have any tips for people living in an apartment where they're dealing only with a balcony, and how you might be able to provide or create kind of a meditative space in that scenario?
Yeah, I actually do. I think that even in a balcony, you can, a lot of these ingredients that we talk about, you can actually bring them in. Like, I feel like you could do a small water feature type thing. Like the sound of falling water is extremely therapeutic, as you know. So having something like that alone with some, there are these, for instance, they have these Japanese maples that are dwarf and they come like what is quote unquote called standards. Their main objective is that they can be put into container gardens. So like I would say, create a container garden where you're just kind of miniaturizing, or almost like you're making everything metaphorical. Like, so yes, you cannot have a tree, but you could have a dwarf tree, or you could have maybe stone pebbles put underneath that tree, So I think that you could certainly take these ingredients and try to bring at least, I would say, 4 of these ingredients into your apartment balcony. Like, for instance, wind chimes is a great one, where you can get the air element into your space.
Great. Those are great ideas. Thank you. I've got another question here. Are there any plants that you would recommend for continual color throughout the year?
Oh, that's a tough one. Continual color, as in like, you know, if you're the best thing that you can do if you want continual color is to go to annuals, obviously, right? So those will give you continual color throughout the year. If you want to use perennials, you have to design with the 4 seasons in mind. So there are certain perennials that are going to be blooming in the spring, certain in the fall, and you need to kind of maybe rely on perennials and shrubs and even trees that have more than 1 season of impact. So maybe you know, planting like a serviceberry, which has spring flowers, has the blueberries in the summer. So spring flowers in the are white, and then you have the blueberries in the summer, and then you have the you know, beautiful orange fall color, and then it has the gray bark, which is kind of you know, striking even in the winter. So you'll have to come up with those kind of things where you're actually, you know, looking at double season impact, or even, you know, 4 season impact. But if you want continual color, the only thing that I know of is annuals. So.
Right, great, great, thank you. And we did have someone just asking, you know, to make sure that these materials will be available. And again, I'll be sending all those links out to everyone in an email in the next day. Do we have any other questions? Give everybody a chance to think a little bit. Such a wonderful amount of information and some beautiful pictures. Thank you for sharing those with us tonight. It looks like maybe that's all the questions. We'll give everybody another minute. We certainly want to thank you again, Vallari, for all the time and effort that went into putting this presentation together. I know we really enjoyed it, so thank you very much. It looks like maybe we did get a chance to answer all the questions. And again, we'll have the links to your website and all those other resources available to you soon. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Everybody take care, and hope to see you again soon.